Hi guys, and welcome to volume 20 of my mini reviews. I dread to think how many movies I've covered already across these 20 episodes, but today I will be talking about 7 more. So there's going to be 6 horror films covered today and 1 wildcard pick which will be non-horror, and if you've studied the thumbnail carefully before tapping into the video then you'll probably already know what that film is. But I don't think we need too much more introduction other than to say that I will be speaking about all of these films in the exact order in which I watched them. Therefore, we will be beginning with this one. First up we have Strange Darling, and already we've arrived at our stinker of the week. I didn't come across this one accidentally. I'd heard good things about it, so I deliberately zeroed in on it, went to see it at the cinema, but it was a massive disappointment. The whole thing is basically an all-out war between a man and a woman, but it's played out of sequence. So there's 6 chapters in this thing. We start with chapter 3, and early on I was actually quite into it because you get a great chase to kick off the movie. The sound design is amazing. That's probably the only good thing about the movie. But then we go back to chapter 1, and that's when the problems hit, because all the tension is just sucked out of the movie, because we're watching these early chapters, these early exchanges, and we know where we have to be for chapter 3. So I just found my interest like drifting away. And the trouble is, chapters 1 and 2 are comfortably the longest chapters in the movie. So we spend a hell of a long time in this build-up section, knowing full well where we have to be. And I just sat there thinking, why did they do this film out of sequence? Like, if this had just been a normal film played chronologically, I could have enjoyed it as a mildly interesting thriller. But the fact that they've mixed all the chapters up has just ruined it for me. And it's not like I'm against this type of movie. I love Christopher Nolan's Memento. I love Pulp Fiction. Zombie Diaries is a good horror example of how you can play certain scenes out of order and it makes the film better somehow. But with this, it's like whoever wrote this deliberately wanted to do a film out of sequence before they had a story, rather than having the story and then thinking, oh, you know what would make this even better? Putting the scenes out of order a little bit. You know, that's what I suspect happened. And it doesn't help that the 2 main characters in this are so bad. Like, so there's one person who is an absolute psycho and I couldn't stand them, and the other person is so naive, even for a horror character. I couldn't get behind any of them, and mentally I drifted away from this movie very quickly. Interestingly though, I will always remember this for one specific reason, and that is that it's the only film I've ever seen in the cinema where I was the only person in there. Over the years, I've been to dozens and dozens of movies by myself because my wife's not into horror. If it's a horror movie, I always go alone. But this is the first time I've been in there on my own, and it was kind of creepy actually, just being in the dark with all these empty seats and stuff. It was really weird. I just wish it had been a better movie, but sadly, no, I didn't like this at all. 1.5 out of 5. Next up we have the film of the week, and I'm not sure this has ever happened before, where we've had the stinker of the week and the film of the week in the first 2 videos. But there's a first time for everything. No, I loved In a Violent Nature, and I wasn't even that interested in it when it came out. I'm pretty sure I ignored it for a while. And then the only reason I decided to watch it is because I saw that it was free on Shudder. So I thought, you know what, go on then, seeing as it's not going to cost me any extra money or anything. But I wasn't massively enthused by this idea of a slasher film set from the killer's perspective. I thought that could get a little bit boring after half an hour. But the brilliance of this film is that it's not entirely from the killer's perspective. The viewpoint does switch when it needs to be. You know, if we were always behind the killer's eyes, I think this would have just been an interesting art film at best, and I wouldn't have thought much more of it. But because the film makes very sensible choices on when to switch the viewpoint, I just thought it was brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So we've got this guy who's been brought back to life. He's like a Jason Voorhees type figure, and unlike in a normal Friday the 13th film, we just spend a lot of time watching an over-the-shoulder viewpoint of him as he's trudging around the woods looking for victims, and it's quite chilling, actually, more than I thought it would be. And the scenery's fantastic in this. I think they shot it in Canada, maybe. It's so effective just watching the killer and just being able to hear the crunch of his boots in the underbrush. It's really unsettling, and suddenly we flash forward to like 5 minutes later when he's in a different part of the forest, but he's still moving forwards. And yeah, I liked it a lot. And I just about settled on a score of 4 out of 5 for this, and then the ending came along, and I had to bump it up another half a point to 4.5 out of 5 because the ending here completely subverts expectation in a really clever way. I just thought it was so brave what they do with the ending of this film, and it's like, wow, I really liked that. And the first thing I did when the credits were rolling was get straight on my phone to see if they were making a sequel. They are, and I'm thrilled about that. And certainly when the second one comes out, I'll be watching it straight away instead of dragging my heels for months like I did with this one. No, forget Terrifier. This is where it's at. This is where the future of slashers is. It's with In a Violent Nature. No, I like Terrifier too, but seriously, this has the potential to be a really good alternative slasher franchise to something like Friday the 13th. It's really top dollar. I kind of feel like I'm going to have to cover the plot of the first platform film here because I think the original came out before this channel was set up. The original came out in 2019. I think it would have predated this channel. So the platform is about a giant prison which is like a tower of like 333 floors. It just goes straight up, and there are a couple of prisoners on every level. And once a day, there's like a platform that starts at the top on floor 1. Floor 1 is at the top, and floor 333 is on the very bottom. And this platform just gets lowered slowly down through the prison, and it's got loads of food on it. So the two people who are on floor 1, they just get the pick of whatever they want, and then it goes down to floor 2 and so on. But by the time it gets to the lower reaches, there's hardly any food left on the platform. Sometimes the platform will literally be empty by the time it gets down to like the 300s. And it's meant to kind of reflect how real society works. You know, at the very top levels of society, people can just stuff their faces and buy what they want and do what they want. But the people in poverty down at the bottom are just getting suffering the effects of this kind of trickle-down society, if you like, where they're just living on scraps and whatever they can get. So it's an interesting analogy with real life society, and during the first film we see the problems that this can cause. The second film is kind of similar. It's set in exactly the same tower block prison, except this time around the prisoners all start to work together. They communicate better just by shouting up and down to each other, and they're all coming up with these strict rules about people only eating a certain amount, because this platform full of food, if people only eat what they need, then it will last for all of the floors, if you see what I mean. Everybody will get to eat, but the problem is people are eating too much in the higher levels. That's where the problems come. So they set up this system in the second film, which means that everybody can eat, but predictably it goes wrong eventually because, you know, there are always people who just can't stick to rules. And so we get a similar kind of film to the first one, but from a slightly different slant. And again, it kind of resembles what happens in real life, because in societies and governments and communities around the world, systems are put in place to ensure that everybody can get food and shelter, but then something goes wrong or whatever, or governments change, or problems hit that weren't expected, and then you end up back in the same situation where not everybody is getting to eat and so forth. So I found this a very worthy sequel. It just about does enough that's different to justify itself. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5. It's a fascinating dystopian survival film. I'd like to see them carry on and do more of these. It is entirely a Netflix thing. I don't think you can access it anywhere else but Netflix. But if you don't have a Netflix subscription, I would absolutely encourage you to just buy 1 month subscription just to watch these 2 platform films. They're excellent. And so we've arrived at the non-horror wildcard pick of the video, which is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I've always been into this franchise ever since the 90s when I used to watch the older ones on TV. And ever since then, I've always tried to watch whichever new one they've brought out. So this is the 4th film of the reboot series that's been going on probably since about 2013, 2014. This one takes place quite a large period of time after the previous one, so we've got mostly new characters, but it's still the same timeline, the same universe as the previous three films. So we've got this young woman played by Freya Allan, who was in The Witcher at one point. I'd say she's about 18, 19 in this film, maybe. So she falls in with a group of, let's call them the good apes. But this band of apes and one human, they get into a skirmish with, well, let's call them the bad apes, because these bad apes want to break into a nuclear bunker and steal loads of abandoned warheads and tanks and things, and that definitely wouldn't be good for what's left of the world at this point. Now, if you're not that into this franchise and you're just giving this a chance on Disney, you might struggle to get through the first half an hour because it is a little bit slow and pondering for a while. But once this film gets going, it's terrific. So many great action sequences towards the end, moments of really high tension. The world itself looks amazing in this. One of the things that fascinates me about this series is just how America looks a little bit older and more knackered with every film. So this time around, I mean, we're basically in the Horizon Zero Dawn stage. Like, all the buildings are looking really skeletal and there's foliage just taking over everywhere. I wonder if we get to like a fifth and a sixth film in this reboot series, we might get to like arid desert landscapes like in Mad Max maybe. But I think this is the best of certainly the reboot series. That the cool thing about these Planet of the Apes films recently is that each one just seems to be getting better and better. I really liked this. I mean, that's not to say that the box office numbers are doing better and better. They might be getting worse for all I know. So I don't know if this series will continue to stay viable, but I really enjoyed this installment and I'm going to give it 4 out of 5. So we're back onto the horror films with The Substance. This is another one I saw in the cinema. I hadn't planned on seeing it, but somebody who follows the channel recommended it to me, and there was nothing else on at the cinema last weekend. Salem's Lot hadn't come out yet, Terrifier hadn't come out yet, so I thought, you know what, sod it, I'll go and watch The Substance. So this is a film starring Demi Moore, of all people. She's playing an actress who has had a really successful Hollywood career, just like Demi Moore, but now she's approaching 60 and the opportunities are starting to dry up. A little bit like it is for Demi Moore in real life, I guess. So this character comes across this thing called The Substance, which, if she takes it, which she does, it turns her into a gorgeous young woman in her 20s, but she can only stay that way for a week, and then she has to go back to being almost 60 again, and then after another week she can go back to being 20-something again. So she's got to keep switching between these identities. That's the way the science of this drug works, right? It's a good concept, I guess, but the entire film is very much played like a weird fever dream. It's like a fantasy. There's not much logic in the story as we proceed forwards, and that just wasn't to my liking. I would have preferred a much more serious take on this, and B, I would have liked to have seen the younger Demi not have the same success in Hollywood as the older Demi. I would have found older Demi's reaction to that quite interesting. There could have been some good drama there, some good character work. Because, you know what, in real life, it's so random whether you make it in Hollywood. There are so many ultra-talented actors and actresses out there who are also really gorgeous to look at, and they still can't make it in the same way that somebody like Demi Moore could. You know, if Demi Moore was reborn today, then 20, 30 years down the line when she grew up, she wouldn't necessarily have the same career that the actual Demi Moore did, even if she was born with the same talent and the same looks, because it's such a crapshoot in Hollywood whether somebody makes it or they don't make it. So this film just coming out and saying that Demi Moore could be reborn almost as a 20-something and she'd have the same success, I didn't really like that. I would have liked to have seen a serious drama horror film about, you know, somebody trying to make it in Hollywood a second time and they just can't fathom why it's not happening second time around. But it's still an interesting film. It's very creative. It's beautifully shot, I'll give it that. And this could almost become this generation's version of The Fly. I mean, I don't know what sort of traction this is going to have in the years to come, whether it'll pick up a little bit of a cult following or whether it'll just kind of fade away, but it's certainly a memorable film. There's some icky stuff in the second half of this. I'm kind of half and half on it myself. I can sort of appreciate what it was trying to do, but ultimately it's just not to my taste. So I'm going to give it a respectable 3 out of 5. The Amusement Park is a lost George Romero film which apparently resurfaced in 2021, and it was swiftly remastered so we can all enjoy it on whichever streaming platform we can find it on. It's about an old guy who goes to the fairground one day on his own, but he encounters prejudice on pretty much every ride and stall he tries to go on, basically, and he doesn't have much money for some reason. He's not having a great time, and we follow him on his journey around the fairground for almost an hour. This is not a long film, but my biggest problem with this is kind of the same one that I had with The Substance. It's presented as too much of a fantasy and not enough as a real drama. And it feels more like some kind of Help the Aged promotional video rather than a proper movie, because we get this introduction by the actor who plays the main character. He comes onto the screen and he's talking to the camera, he's breaking the fourth wall, and he's saying, look, old people have a really tough time and let's not forget that when we're watching this movie, and blah, 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 blah. And then he finishes the whole thing with another breaking the wall type speech, from what I can remember. So I'm not entirely sure what this film was made for. And I'm not saying it's really bad or anything. I found it quite interesting to watch. But I don't actually know what George intended with this, what it was meant to achieve, who was meant to actually watch it, how it was meant to be released. All I know is that it got lost at some point and now it's just come back, but it doesn't entirely play like a normal film. I'm almost hesitant to give it a score, actually, but I will do anyway. So I'll give it 2 out of 5 because it's a little bit weird, but it might be worth checking out if you don't have time to watch a film that's that long, because like I said, this is less than an hour. Or maybe you just want to check out every single George Romero film. If you are a fan of his, in that case, then yeah, get on and catch this. But for me personally, it was nothing more than an interesting little curiosity, and then I'm ready to move on. Finally today we have Shut In, which is a terrible title for a movie. It doesn't roll off the tongue at all. So this is about a young woman. She's got 2 small kids. One of them's about 6 and the other one's a baby. And they live in a small house in the country, but they're living a very meagre existence. I think they're trying to grow apples at the start of this story just to make some cash, and they're not making a very good job of it. But then one day the ex-boyfriend turns up and he's an absolute horror show, this guy. He's awful. He's got himself into debt problems, so to get himself out of this situation, he's brought with him to the house some kind of sex offender, and the idea is that to pay off his debt, he's going to introduce this guy to his kids. That is how horrible this ex-boyfriend is. Now, I'll say at this juncture that nothing bad happens to the kids in this movie, if you're already put off by this film. I'm going to spoil that for you, but the threat of something happening is there for a while, which did concern me. Now, the ex-boyfriend and this other guy who turns up, they lock the woman into a cupboard, and she's basically there for ages, and she's getting all panicked at what might be happening to her kids. Eventually she manages to find a way out, and then she's got to take care of these 2 guys. So this kind of plays a little bit more like a thriller at times than a horror film. My pulse never really got that high watching this. I was never all that excited by it. I did like the main character, the main woman, and her relationship with her kid is kind of cute, but this is very much horror light, for people who don't want to go too far over the border from thriller country. I can't see many horror fans getting that much out of this. But at the same time, I mean, there's nothing particularly wrong with it. It is what it is, and I managed to get all the way through it without switching it off. So I'm going to give it 2 out of 5. I wouldn't say it's completely ineffective, but it's certainly very throwaway if you're someone who watches a lot of horror films. So we'll leave it there for today. Do let me know in the comments what you think of the 7 movies that I've covered here. There's no reading update today because I've still not finished The Dead Zone by Stephen King. As soon as I have done, I will do another reading update. But for now, I guess we will leave it right there. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.